thanks very much for coming back for the final panel. 45 minutes of intense grilling of these three panelists. Oh no, I'm sorry. I promised them it would be a delightful session.
Liar.
Now they're wondering what they signed up for. No, this last session we've heard from lots of different perspectives from across the academic and research ecosystem. And so this last session, what we wanted to do is maybe focus on publishing and maybe asking the question, well, who's driving sustainability within publishing and how do we view that? So to join me and to discuss this is Stephen Hefner, Managing Director, Publications, IEEE, Colette Bean, Chief Publishing Officer, American Physiological Society, and Liz Ferguson, Senior Vice President from Wiley. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. We're now very nervous.
So maybe I start off. I mean, today we've covered lots of different topics: diversity, inclusion, SDGs, research evaluation, funding. So maybe I can ask you a simple question, because sustainability means lots of different things to lots of different people. How do your organisations view sustainability?
So the way we see it largely at Wiley is probably the way an awful lot of organisations see it. So clearly environmental sustainability is a fundamental part of the way that we look at our commitments in this space, but it's not just environmental sustainability, it's also the social responsibilities that we have. And that applies to the social responsibilities we have within our own walls, so providing good, secure, safe working environments, good opportunities and equal opportunities for people that we employ, but also those that take place outside of our walls, which are more aligned with the way in which we develop our products and the expectations that we have of people that we partner with and the expectations that they have of us as well. And so the kind of ways in which that plays out are things like commitments to carbon net zero by 2040, making sure that we've got an eye on our entire supply chain and engaging with vendors who have similar commitments to our own and that they're also tracking in the way that we do. It plays out in the way that we hire and develop our people and the expectations we have of engaging with them as well, in the way that we can reduce inequalities within our own working environment.
And how does it work for a society, perhaps?
Yeah, it's quite different. I mean, in a non-commercial corporate environment where we're really focused on the science. And so any kind of conversations around sustainability really are about following the science. And I mean, we're a physiological society, so we're focused on understanding life and health. And so any sort of conversations that I've had with our member stakeholders about sustainability really have to be honing in on the things that our members are researching and are involved in. And so, when I look at the 17 SDGs, not all of them are relevant for my community, but there are some. So there's a couple. The global health and well-being is a good example. We're really focused on empowering discovery to improve health, and so that one really resonates with my members and is something I can move the needle on. And in fact, our organization just launched a new program called Women's Health Research Initiative that is tracking with the Biden announcement that he made about this research area, which is really exciting and can really help also with gender diversity. So everything we do is kind of through that science lens, and how so thinking about, when we were thinking about signing on to the compact, it was, okay, how can I make this sort of real for my stakeholders so that they want to participate and see a role for themselves in that environment?
At the IEEE, I mean, we're very similar to APS in that regard, that we view the goals through the lens of what our mission is in general. It's not a corporate imperative. It's a missional imperative for the IEEE. So it's pretty easy for us to align things that we do with the SDGs. We are we are probably out of the 17, about half of them apply to the scientific areas that we operate in: clean water, clean energy, smart cities, quality education. We're even involved in agriculture and oceanography and things like that. So we've got a lot of cred there. We do interesting things like smart cities, where we'll electrify a little village in Nepal with sustainable energy. So we've got a lot of cred in that area. But from a publishing lens, I'd like to pick up on something Colette said, which is, for us, we're focused on the quality science. So when we look at something like DEI, we do it from a perspective not of fairness, but of truth-seeking. That is, the scholarly record requires the perspectives of everyone to have a valid empirical position. So anytime that we're excluding voices, excluding perspectives, we are endangering and biasing the scholarly record. So we want to make sure that we're trying to bring researchers in, bring research in, bring voices in that are giving us a better picture of truth, so that we don't leave a less fair record into the future.
Okay, so that's clear. How does it work in practice? Do you have small teams? Is this
We don't
integrated?
actually do this.
We've talked a lot about sort of funding mechanisms. We've talked about how it works practically. So is it a small team? Is it sort of integrated? Is it a publishing activity? Is it sort of, led by people within the organization? Change makers, for example.
It was funny when we were talking about this session. You said, "What kind of resources are you using?" And I said, "Resources? What resources?" Basically, we're a very small organization, and we don't have an entire department focused on this topic, and so it's really, a patchwork of bringing people together that are kind of carving out a bit of their day job in order to dedicate. So DEI is a good example. So I have someone who focuses on ethics, so he is also handling our DEI work for publications, not for the member part of our society. And so we just simply don't have that ability to kind of carve out massive departments. And that does mean that you have trade-offs. So what do you spend your time on? And every single thing you do spend time on means that you're not spending time on something else. And so we've prioritized primarily things that connect well with what the rest of our society is doing. So DEI was a good example. We have lots of DEI initiatives at the society level that we could connect the dots and try to pull our publishing into that activity so that we have a smooth story to tell about all the different programming in the organization. And then everything else is very science-based. So the Women's Health Initiative that I mentioned, that is connecting with a major program that's happening within the rest of the organization. And so we're hooking our publishing activities into that component. So it's a very different environment than I think a large corporate organization.
Nice segue over to Liz.
So, the world inside a large corporate organization. We are fortunate to have the resource to be able to devote significant energy and thinking and enthusiasm to this, but that alone wouldn't be enough. So to highlight the sort of areas that we do have, a number of you who were in this room earlier today will have heard Bill speaking, and Bill leads our sort of corporate ESG efforts across enterprise widely, so beyond just the research publishing piece that STM is responsible for. In addition, we have a DE&I lead at the vice president level, a guy called Art Howard, who is in the process of expanding his team right now. But what becomes important after that is it's not the sort of sole and bespoke area of those two individuals and the people that they have around them, but that this is an area of discussion throughout the whole organization. So we've made a commitment to 3 of the UN SDG goals at that highest level around quality education and around climate and reducing inequality. And we kind of take that work through 10 employee resource groups, which are focused on various different areas. There's an LGBTQIA+ group, there is a green working group, there's a visible and invisible disabilities group as well, which I chair as the senior lead. So there's all sorts of different groups through which we can both kind of promulgate the central thinking that's coming through, but also take input back in from those groups to help us further shape the thinking around what it is that we're doing. And then as a publishing organization, and specifically in the research journals publishing part of the organization, and this is where that more science-based approach comes into play for us, or the sort of more mission-driven element. We have a lot of external partners who have expectations and positions themselves in this space. And we also have some partners who don't, and so that's where we figure it's up to us to help set some standards. So all of our contracts, for example, now with editors, contain clauses around DE&I expectations. We have training for internal staff who, when they might be commissioning content for journals, make sure that they're properly representative, as Stephen said, of the breadth of the discipline and all of the voices that can contribute to it. We've got guidance around how to prepare figures so that you're using colors and styles that are accessible to multiple groups, to all groups of people. So that kind of is the way in which it plays out in our products, as well as within our kind of more corporate and organizational thinking.
It's a good contrast. I mean, because the IEEE is kind of halfway between these two, right? That we're big, so we don't really have a resource issue in terms of money and hands to do things. But we don't have the governance structure to organize that as well. So we're a very volunteer-led organization. So that means you see DEI initiatives or SDG initiatives popping up at different levels in the organization. Last year, our president, Saifer Rahman, and our presidents only last for 1 year at a time. So there's a 1 year cycle, then the next president comes. But Saifer said early on in the year that climate change was his #1 priority, and he wanted to mobilize the entire organization to address it. So that, that was something we could follow, and we were given resources to do so. So we're launching a climate change multidisciplinary journal where we've created a curated collection of resources around climate change. We have the Power and Energy Society, we have a Computer Society, we have a lot of disciplines that would address those issues. And we've done newsletters and certain educational products like certification in green tech. And we even have a program that stemmed from that on creating TikToks to educate young people on the real story of climate change and not bogus science. So there's that like high level thing that kind of pops into existence because the president wants it. But then there's more grassroots things like the MOVE truck, which is a truck that a regional group in the southeast of the United States put together to run around and do disaster relief and create communications and satellite communications and command and control centers for people who are trying to restore power after a storm. So you've got these kind of things that just happen here and there. The smart villages that I mentioned before is was an initiative of a chapter in Asia. So we've got both grassroots and we've got high level stuff. But we don't have a really structured way to say, this is a program we're going to do all the time. And in fact, we have a governance problem that we're working on right now, is that the climate change initiative expired when Saifer Rahman left. We have no way to keep that going, unless the next president decided that he or she wanted to do that. So we're trying to work on ways that we can build multi-year task forces or something so that we can take some of these initiatives and give them a lifespan and a budget and some accountability. Because we don't want to start just standing committees that will exist forever, and we've already got like 40 of them. Gordon is the governance guy. He knows that it grows multiple heads and they never go away. So. That's a challenge. So that's the answer, is that like we're trying to organize it, but it's very difficult to, because the energy comes from all sorts of parts in the organization, and you don't want to stifle it, right? You want to let it flourish.
Yeah, I think that's really important, actually. And we have it bubbling up as well, and having this programmatic way of dealing with it is great. But if we didn't have it bubbling up, we wouldn't be listening properly to people who are closest to these issues, care most about them, and all the rest of it. So right. I think it's really important that it bubbles up all around the organization.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think the time period's quite interesting, right? Because, I mean, you're talking about the presidency being 1 year. Of course, the global goals are till 2030, which extends beyond lots of the business plans, right? Or portfolio plans, even if you're an editor. So how do you kind of view this idea that, 2030 is increasingly in scope, it's getting closer, but also, you're thinking about 2040, net zero goals. I mean, these are really long-term ambitions. How do you kind of weigh up the time period here?
That is definitely a challenge. The governance initiative to figure out how to do multi-year task forces is actually coming from an ad hoc committee called the 2050 ad hoc, preparing IEEE for the year 2050 and all of the challenges associated with that. And so, I mean, I don't know that there's an answer. I'll report back on what the ad hoc says, but I do think that starting to think about it now and preparing for what you will not know later in these structures is going to be key for us.
Yeah, I think for an organization like ours, a lot of that leadership comes from our editors because they do stay on longer. We have a very similar structure with presidents coming in, president-elect, president, past president, so they are at least around for 3 years, but their main focus is during that year of their presidency, where our editorships are typically 6 years. They're 3 years and then renewable for another 3. And so if one of the things that we've been focused on since I got to APS is really connecting our publishing to the rest of the programming work that's happening in the organization so that we can then really connect those dots more effectively in terms of how we're communicating our science, how we're kind of moving the needle. And so all of the other things that we do sort of under the hood, trying to determine baseline data for our DEI initiatives and pubs is all kind of through that lens and has a lot of editor leadership around it, which is, I think, helpful. As a way to provide some continuity that we experience the same in terms of our governance structure at the president level.
Yeah, this is where I'm having to imagine myself into Bill's shoes and thinking about the answer to this one. But from my perspective, I guess, the kind of goals that we're talking about here are not the kind of goals that even if you threw every resource under the sun at it, you could deliver within 3 years, right? They're long-term because these problems on this scale, challenges on this scale require long-term, deeply embedded solutions. And there's no way that anyone could map out for any particular activity today in 2024, we're going to do this, and by the time we get to 2028 and then 2036, and oh, look, 2050, 40, here we are. So the baseline measurements are really important. We're doing quite a lot of that in our DE&I work. We're also doing a lot of work around capturing our emissions in terms of the contribution to the net zero ambition, identifying the steps that can be taken today that move us along the right roadmap towards the future goal that we've identified. So we're doing things like partnering with Trees for the Future to plant trees for every print journal that we don't actually print, for example. So setting out near-term, measurable contributions that take us to that bigger long-term goal and adjusting and course correcting as we go and making sure that everyone knows that the goal is the important bit and the how and the when, well, not the when, but the how we're going to get there may necessarily have to morph and change feels important.
And I'll be a little controversial now, because why not? It's nearly the end of the day. Do you think academic publishers are pulling their weight in sustainability? Do you think that we're prioritizing it? Do you see the momentum? I mean, you've been part of the STM board for a number of years. I mean, do you see the winds of change coming through, or has it always been there?
I do sense it. I mean, like a day like today would not have happened 5 years ago, for a start. That shows, I think, the sign of the importance that these issues create for the industry. The fact that organizations like mine with resources at its disposal are investing resources. It's still a choice. It's not like we have people wandering around the building trying to find things to fill their time with. So we're still making a choice to devote resource to sustainability goals and to DE&I and giving fairly large bodies of people the time and space to run the employee resource groups in the way they would want and explore these issues in depth there. Is a choice that we've made, and it does, cost money, or whichever way you want to put it. So yes, it's vitally important. And is academic publishing pulling its weight? I'd say possibly, probably ahead of some industries, but behind others, like almost everything in life. I did see a very different type of organization, industry, posting their corporate sustainability report on LinkedIn the other week, and they got an absolute bashing for it. And I'll talk off the platform about who that was. And I don't see necessarily publishers coming in for that level of criticism for this kind of effort, because I do believe it's coming from the right place. We are, even those of us who are corporate and not mission-driven, are very close to the scientific communities, research communities, and people who care very deeply about this. And if we're not respecting the way in which they want to partner with organizations as well, we won't succeed.
I agree with Liz. I mean, I've been involved with STM. I've come to meetings over the years, and I think the restructure that STM did a year or so ago that prioritized this topic by creating the group that you lead as chair wouldn't have happened 5 years ago, and that we are focused, I think, quite differently on things that are important to the communities that we serve as publishers. And so I think from that perspective, STM as an association, trade association, I think is putting a stake in the ground that it is something that's important. I think as a society publisher, I never think it's going to be enough, because we're really hyper focused on very specific things, and we don't have the luxury of doing some of what Liz has described. We're not focused on carbon emissions. This is a good example. It's not something I'm focusing on because it's not really all that relevant to the science that we do. And so instead, I'm focusing on the things that I know can get hearts and minds. So I think there's always more we can be doing. And the question of how you kind of build it into an infrastructure in a way that's sustainable, in the different use of the word sustainable, so that it actually continues having momentum, is also really important.
So I guess that leaves me with the no, right? Since that's you. And I'll say a perspective on the way it's a no. Is we tend to, as an industry, and with the introduction that yes, I believe that STM is going in the right direction, and I think we are all doing things, and this day is a really important step in that direction. But as an industry, we tend to focus very narrowly on the people we serve, the professors and their requirements for what they need to publish, and most of the academics we're talking about in these areas. Which tends to not allow us to address solutions-based scholarship, but rather narrowly defined taxonomies of the people in faculty. So we have 200 journals. As we launch new journals, they get more narrow and narrow in those taxonomies, and then we get, like artificial intelligence in signal processing for image manipulation in antennas that are based in Scotland. And like there's a whole journal devoted to that, right? But solutions-based journals would be the way for us to bring multidisciplinary scholarship to address these problems. So like the climate change journal that I mentioned that we're working on launching is actually a very difficult thing to do for us, because we have people fighting over scope. We've got communities in computer science that don't want to work with the people in oceanography. There are people whose opinions would matter in that problem, but they're not part of our community. There are no meteorologists in the IEEE. So how do we as an industry break away from our myopic focus on the people that we have always traditionally served, and just take that leap of faith that they will come if we provide a different venue and outlet?
I'm going to ask if there's any questions from the audience in the last couple of minutes. This is your chance. Oh, it's the end of the day. Okay, I'll do one final question, a killer question. No, just joking. What's maybe the single most influential factor you think will really make a difference between now and 2030 to really advance sustainability? I mean, Stephen, maybe we start with you, because you've already sort of mentioned multidisciplinary, but also the need to innovate, right?
Exactly. I mean, to me, there may be two. The one I mentioned is the governance problem. So that's kind of reflected in what I just said. I mean, the other one, it's staring us in the face, is the money problem. So no money, no mission. The pressures on our revenue are high. Open access transition is not going to guarantee us growth into the future. the publishing program fuels the IEEE as it fuels all society businesses. So I think that, we need to be able to figure out that problem if we're going to be able to continue to contribute to a future that moves towards these goals.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's about trust in science, and I really think you need to follow the science in order to actually enact change. And trust in science, I think, is something that my member stakeholders worry an awful lot about, and I'm sure all of you who work with academics worry about this. And if we really want to enable changes, and we really want to implement real initiatives that are going to impact the SDGs, we first have to make sure that there's trust in science and that there's a way to ensure that everything that we're publishing can really help, to really make sure that when you're reading it, okay, it's based on what we know today, and that there's a method for updating, et cetera. So that's, from my perspective, I think the biggest thing. And that's not an easy thing in today's age. I mean, I think I popped in after the STM board meeting right at the end of one of the sessions that seemed to be trying to tackle this issue, and I think it's really important, so.
I get to say all the things that they said, totally endorse. And I suppose that the biggest drive, if climate disaster, biodiversity loss, pollution aren't initiators enough to push us along this path further and faster and accelerate and all the rest of it to 2030, and the positive change that we can drive in behaviors and social responsibility and so on, then I'd say that certainly for us, our investors are asking us to report on this, to talk about this, to demonstrate our actions. Our partners are, our customers are, the highfalutin professors and some of the sort of more applied researchers that we serve are. And if those aren't enough, coupled with the previous pressures, then regulation's coming down the pike pretty fast. And that's going to force it, even if it hasn't been sort of a path that we've gone willingly down. We're going willingly down it. And trying to go further and faster, and it has to be kind of embedded in all of the things that we do, which is why I'm lucky enough to say all the things they said, plus.
Right, and it's not so, we're not going to be the solution to any of these problems, but we can create the conditions for assisting with it, right? Like we're facing things like fractured information space, lack of trust in science, all of that. Let's take care of our piece and make that sustainable to be built upon. Yep. But yeah, it's overweening to think that we'd be able to solve climate change. So.
I wish we could.
Oh, we do have one question. You can squeeze that in.
So I've learned a lot from today, including your panel. But one of the, as a relatively medium-sized society, yes, math is important, but everything we try to think about is done in context of some of the pieces of the SDG umbrella. So equity, inclusiveness. Equity is a word we use in sort of when we talk to politicians, though we can't do it if we're talking to someone from Florida. But in general, we are trying to chip away at these SDGs. I am not sure that small societies, including my own society at a governance level, when they think about sustainable development goals, they're not thinking about the things that we're actually doing, like accessibility, like real DEI initiatives. We have a DEI director, for example. And I'm not sure the link is there between SDG and some of these pieces of the SDG. It's obvious on climate, but I'm wondering how you would respond to that.
Thanks for the question, Robert. It seems to me that SDG is a term completely unknown to the IEEE. Like, we do not use the taxonomy thereof. We don't speak about it. We don't speak about it in our board level or at our staff level. It's just invisible to us as a construct and a vocabulary. But that doesn't mean that they're not clearly, the things that we're doing aren't on their face good for humanity. The tagline of the IEEE is advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. So we point toward that North Star, not the SDGs, but I think we end up with the right directional thing anyway. I don't know if that addresses it.
Yeah, I definitely think it's true for APS that we're not focused on the SDGs, but that we are focused on things that are of particular relevance to the physiology community. And so that is a challenge. I mean, when I looked at, should we sign on to the compact, I'm like, it doesn't necessarily fit for the kinds of things that we're focused on. And so trying to convince our member leaders that it is something that we should do is a bit of a lift, frankly. So yeah, I agree with Steve. That it's really, for an organization like mine, it's definitely at the science level. And anything that we do, if it isn't, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense for long, and we won't be able to continue to fuel the activity for very long without it.
I think the SDGs are a helpful framework, but they're not the only one. And I think that you can hang other things, you can hang things on them if you wish anyway. Some of them are more or less relevant to us. We don't pay them all equal attention by any means. And just describing what sustainability and a commitment looks like for a single organization can take multiple different forms and draw on multiple different sources.
Great. I think I'm going to thank my panel. Thank you very much. I think it was a really interesting conversation.